I never thought the day would come when a simple act of trust would shake me to my core. You see, I loaned my son my old truck, a truck that's been with me through storms, cross-country drives, and years of hard work. At the time, I figured it was just a set of wheels he needed for a while, nothing more. But weeks later, when I slid into that familiar seat, turned the key, and reached into the glove box, what I found nearly stopped my heart. It wasn't money. It wasn't anything material. It was something far heavier, something that spoke louder than any words my son had ever said to me. And I realized, right there in that moment, that the bond between a father and his child can be tested in ways you never expect. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Are you in California, Texas, New York, or somewhere else? I'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe if you believe parents deserve respect, because this story is one every family needs to hear. That old truck wasn't just a machine parked in the driveway. It was a chapter of my life, written in steel and dust. Every dent in the body had a story. The small scrape on the passenger door came from the day I taught my son to drive in an empty church parking lot, his hands gripping the wheel like it might bite back. The dent in the bumper was from hauling firewood up in the hills when a log slipped and slammed into it. Even the worn spot on the seat beside me told its own tale of fishing trips, late-night talks, and the simple company of silence on long drives. The smell inside was a mixture of old leather, motor oil, and faint tobacco from my father before me. To most, it might just smell like age. To me, it was memory itself. It reminded me of long shifts, coming home tired, sliding behind the wheel, and feeling like I had one steady thing I could count on. I always told my kids that the truck wasn't worth much on paper, but it carried value you couldn't measure. It was the truck that took us on family vacations, pulled neighbors out of ditches in the snow, and carried my son to his first job interview. It wasn't just transportation, it was legacy. When I handed my son those keys, it wasn't only a loan. It was a quiet promise, a statement of trust. I was telling him, without needing to say it out loud, "You're old enough now. You can carry this piece of our story forward." And that's why what I found inside weeks later cut so deep. Because when you give someone something that holds your history, what they do with it tells you a lot about how they see your love. It was a Tuesday evening when he asked. Nothing dramatic about the moment, just the two of us standing in the driveway, the sun slipping low, painting the sky that kind of orange you don't forget. He kicked at the gravel with his shoe, hands buried in his pockets. "Dad," he started, clearing his throat. "I was wondering if I could use the truck for a while." The words came out casual, almost too casual, but his eyes didn't match his tone. He wouldn't look straight at me at first. His shoulders were tight, like he was bracing for me to say no. I could hear that little hesitation in his voice, the kind sons get when they're asking for more than just the thing itself. I leaned against the hood, watching him fumble with his keys. Pride swelled in me, because here he was, stepping into adulthood, trying to stand on his own 2 feet. But there was hesitation, too. That truck wasn't just a tool, it was a piece of me. And beneath my pride lived a father's quiet worry, wondering if he was ready to carry something that had carried me through so much. I asked him why he needed it. He shrugged, said it would help with work, with getting around. The words made sense, but something about his restless hands told me there was more he wasn't saying. Still, I nodded. Sometimes a father gives trust not because he's certain, but because he knows his son needs the chance. I pulled the keys from my pocket, feeling their weight before I placed them in his hand. And for a brief second, I saw relief in his eyes. But behind it, something else lingered, something I couldn't name. The keys felt heavier in my hand that evening than they ever had before. It wasn't just the cold metal pressing against my palm, it was everything they stood for. Years of work, memories, and lessons, all bound up in something so simple. I turned them over once, feeling the edges, remembering the times I had gripped them tight after long shifts, the way my son's tiny fingers once played with them as a boy, jingling them like a toy. Back then, he didn't know the weight they carried. And maybe, in some ways, he still didn't. When I stretched my hand out to him, I wasn't just handing him transportation. I was handing him trust, responsibility, a piece of myself. Fathers don't always say these things out loud. We let actions do the talking. But in that moment, I wanted him to understand this wasn't just a loan. It was a test of character. He reached out, his hand steady but his eyes uncertain. Our fingers brushed, and I saw a flicker in his face, gratitude mixed with nervousness. He knew it mattered. "Take care of it," I said softly. Simple words. But I meant more than the truck. I meant our bond. I meant the respect that should exist between a father and his son. And as he walked toward the driver's side, jangling those keys like they were finally his, I stood there a little longer, the quiet of the driveway pressing in. I felt both pride and an ache I couldn't quite explain because letting go, even in small ways, is never easy for a father. The first week after he drove off with the truck, things felt steady enough. He called me once or twice, quick check-ins. "Run's good, Dad," or "I filled it up today." Short, almost rushed updates, but they eased my mind at the time. The second week, I spotted it parked outside his apartment once when I drove by. Same dents, same faded paint, but something about seeing it under his care stirred a strange mix in me, pride that he had it, and a quiet worry I pushed aside. By the third week, the updates grew thinner. A quick text here, a half-hearted call there. Nothing outright alarming, but the tone was different. Less detail, less warmth. Just enough to keep me from asking too many questions. On the surface, everything seemed fine. The truck still ran. He was using it. Life went on. But a father's heart knows when something doesn't sit right. I couldn't point to any one thing. It was more like the spaces between the words, the pauses, the way he kept the conversations clipped. I told myself not to overthink it. After all, kids grow up, they get busy, they guard their independence. Still, late at night, I'd catch myself staring at that empty spot in the driveway where the truck had always sat, wondering if I had given away more than just a set of keys. It felt like the calm before a storm I couldn't yet see. By the fourth week, the calls had nearly dried up. Where there had once been a few words, quick updates, small reassurances, now there was nothing but unanswered rings and the occasional text that said little more than, "I'm fine, Dad." I tried not to press too hard. I remembered what it was like at his age, wanting space, trying to prove you could handle life without your parents hovering. Still, silence has a weight to it, heavier than any argument. Words, even sharp ones, at least tell you where you stand. Silence leaves you stranded in the unknown. Every evening, I'd find myself looking out at the driveway, still empty. That old truck had been part of the scenery for so long that its absence gnawed at me. I'd listen for the sound of its engine coming up the road, that familiar rumble that used to bring comfort. But night after night, it never came. It wasn't just the truck I missed. It was him, the conversations, the small pieces of his life I used to be part of. A father can handle many things, but being shut out, being kept at arm's length, that's the kind of hurt you don't talk about easily. No slammed doors, no angry words, just silence. And in that silence, the distance between us grew louder than anything we could have said. It was a Saturday morning when I finally decided to take the truck out myself. The gauge was sitting on empty, the needle stubbornly pressed against the red. I pulled into the gas station, the same one I'd stopped at for years, and slid behind the wheel like I was greeting an old friend. The moment I opened the door, the smell hit me, old leather mixed with dust, that faint trace of motor oil that never quite went away. It was a scent I'd grown used to over decades, one that carried memories tucked into every corner of my mind. I rested my hand on the steering wheel, worn smooth in places where my grip had shaped it. That same wheel had steadied my son when he was 14, nervously learning how to make turns in the church parking lot. My voice back then was calm but firm. "Easy now. Don't fight it. Let the wheel guide you." I could still see the determination on his face, his hands clenched like he was holding on for dear life. As I pumped the gas, the smell of gasoline rose in the air, sharp and familiar. It brought me back to Saturday mornings when he was younger, sitting in the passenger seat with a bag of donuts in his lap, swinging his feet against the floorboard because they couldn't quite reach. We'd laugh about nothing, just father and son, filling the tank before heading off to the hardware store or the fishing hole. Now, sitting there alone, the silence inside the cab felt different. He wasn't that boy anymore, and I wasn't the same father. The miles between us weren't on the odometer, they were in the unspoken words, the growing distance. I leaned back, staring at the cracked dashboard, and for a moment it felt like the truck itself was holding my memories, carrying both the weight of where we'd been and the ache of where we were now. After filling the tank, I slid back into the seat and let the engine idle. The old rumble filled the cabin, steady and familiar, but my mind wasn't settled. I reached over to the glove box, half out of habit. Usually, it held the same things it always had: crumpled napkins, an old registration slip, maybe a half-empty pack of mints. The latch clicked, and the door fell open with its usual creak. I shuffled through the clutter, fingers brushing against receipts and faded papers. That's when I noticed something folded too carefully to be junk. A plain envelope, edges worn as if it had been opened and closed a dozen times. I picked it up, and immediately, my chest tightened. On the front, written in his handwriting, my son's handwriting, was a single word: Dad. For a long moment I just stared at it. My hands, rough from years of work, suddenly felt unsteady. The world outside the windshield carried on cars pulling in and out, people hurrying about their Saturday, but inside that cab, time slowed. I slid my thumb under the fold and opened it. The paper inside was lined, torn from a notebook. His handwriting, uneven and pressed hard, filled the page. I didn't even need to read the first sentence to know this wasn't just a note. This was something heavier, something he hadn't been able to say to my face. And right then, holding that letter, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Whatever I was about to read, I knew it would change how I saw my son, and maybe how I saw myself as his father. I unfolded the paper slowly, careful not to tear the creases that had already worn thin. My eyes fell on the first line, and before I even finished reading it, my throat tightened. Dad, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't bring myself to say these words to your face. I stopped there, my hand tightening around the page until it crinkled. Those few words cut deeper than I expected. My own son, my flesh and blood, felt he couldn't look me in the eye and speak his truth. That realization stung more than anything he might confess. I forced myself to keep reading. I know you've always told me to be honest, no matter how hard it island. But honesty feels different when it's your father you're facing. I didn't want to see the look in your eyes when I told you the truth. I didn't want to see disappointment where I've always wanted pride. The letters blurred for a moment as my vision grew wet. I blinked hard, trying to steady myself. I'd raised this boy, taught him that mistakes could be forgiven, that love was bigger than failure. Yet here he was, afraid of me, afraid of my judgment. Sitting there in that worn driver's seat, I felt a weight pressing down on my chest. This wasn't just a letter. This was a confession wrapped in fear, and the pain in his words reached deeper than any silence had. I realized then that whatever came next on that page, it would be more than just his story. It would be a mirror held up to me as his father. My eyes moved down the page, and the words grew heavier with every line. Dad, I've messed up, more than I ever wanted you to know. I've been running with people I shouldn't. At first, it was just late nights, staying out too long, spending money I didn't have. I told myself it was harmless, that I could handle it. But it got worse. I felt my chest tighten. These weren't just boyish mistakes. These were choices that carried weight. I borrowed money, Dad, more than I can pay back. I thought I could flip it quick, make things right, but I didn't. Now I owe people I shouldn't owe. That's why I asked for the truck. Not just for work. I needed it to get away, to figure things out, to have something I could count on when I didn't know where else to turn. I let out a long breath and pressed the paper flat against the steering wheel, my hands trembling. The idea that my son, my own son, was caught up in debts, running with the wrong crowd, made my stomach turn. I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want to be the son who failed. I know you worked hard, that you carried this family on your back, and here I am, already stumbling. The words blurred again as my eyes filled. There's a certain ache that comes when your child admits to being lost. Not anger, not at first, just a hollow pain deep in your chest, like you've failed too. I leaned back, staring at the cracked roof of that old truck. My boy wasn't just hiding mistakes, he was drowning in them. And the worst part was, he believed he had to carry it all alone. Then I reached the line that stopped me cold. I didn't want you to see me as a failure. I read it once, then again, and by the third time, I couldn't keep my hands steady. The words seemed to sink into me, deeper than any cut could reach. My own son, my boy, believed that my eyes, the same eyes that watched him take his first steps and his first breath of freedom behind the wheel, would see him not as my child, but as a failure. That broke something inside me. I sat there, staring at those words, and for the first time, I asked myself, had I done that? Had my lectures, my stern looks, my high expectations made him believe my love was tied to perfection? Had I, without meaning to, convinced him that my pride was something to be earned instead of freely given? I thought back to every time I'd told him he could do better. Every time I'd shaken my head when he slipped up, I thought I was shaping him, preparing him for the world. But maybe, just maybe, I had been chiseling away at his belief that he could ever fall and still be caught by me. My chest ached with a guilt I couldn't name. A father's job is to protect, to guide, to love without condition. And yet here he was, writing me a letter because he couldn't bear to say these things out loud, afraid my love would crumble if I saw his flaws. I pressed the paper to my lap and buried my face in my hands. At that moment, it wasn't his mistakes that hurt me most. It was the thought that my son doubted my love. I forced myself to keep reading, though every line felt heavier than the last. I didn't mean to shut you out, Dad. I know the silence hurt you. I didn't know how to talk to you about the mess I made. Every time the phone rang, I thought about answering. Every time you asked how I was, I thought about telling you the truth. But I couldn't. I felt too ashamed. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe I could fix it before you ever had to find out. The words were pressed deep into the paper, as if he had written them with a weight on his chest. And in every curve of those letters I could feel his shame. The truth is, I was scared of letting you down. I didn't want to see that look on your face, the one that says I could have done better. So I thought silence was easier. But the silence became its own burden. Every day I didn't call. Every night I didn't check in. It got heavier. I knew I was building a wall between us, and I hated myself for it. But I didn't know how to climb back over. I sat there in the cab, the letter trembling in my hands. His words didn't just reveal his burden, they put it on my shoulders too. The fear, the shame, the crushing belief that his mistakes made him unworthy of my presence. And I couldn't help but wonder, had I taught him this? Had I, through my own silence or disappointment over the years, built the idea that his failures would separate us? I swallowed hard, realizing that my son had been carrying a weight so heavy, he thought the only way to survive was to hide it. And in that hiding, he was hurting himself and me more than he realized. I set the letter down on the passenger seat and just sat there, staring at the worn steering wheel in front of me. My son's words kept echoing in my head, circling back to the same painful thought. He was more afraid of my disappointment than he was sure of my love. And I had to ask myself, how did we get here? I thought about the years when he was younger, when I believed the best way to guide him was with firm hands and sharp words. I remembered standing over him at the kitchen table, correcting his homework, telling him he needed to focus more, try harder, quit wasting his potential. I thought I was building discipline. I thought I was giving him the tools he'd need to survive a hard world. But then I remembered the look he used to give me. Sometimes quiet, eyes down, lips pressed tight. Back then, I took it as stubbornness. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the first seed of fear, planted by the idea that my approval was fragile. I thought about every stern look I gave when he came home late, every sigh of frustration when he didn't follow through, every lecture where I talked more than I listened. I told myself it was love, that it was my job to push him. But now, reading his letter, I wondered if what he heard wasn't love at all but the belief that my love lived on the other side of his success. The truth hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I'd always believed my love was obvious. After all, I worked for him, provided for him, sacrificed for him. But maybe, to a son, love isn't just sacrifice, it's presence. It's gentleness. It's the assurance that even when he falls, the ground beneath him will be his Father's arms, not his Father's judgment. And in that moment, I couldn't escape the question that gnawed at me. Had I spent so much time being a teacher, a provider, a disciplinarian, that I had forgotten to just be his father? The silence in the cab pressed in on me, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of my own shortcomings as heavy as the weight my son had carried in secret. I turned the key and let the truck roll out of the gas station, the hum of the engine filling the silence I couldn't escape. The road stretched ahead of me, familiar and empty. But my mind wasn't on the drive. It was on my boy. As the tires hummed against the pavement, memories came in waves. I saw him again as a little boy in the passenger seat, swinging his legs because they couldn't reach the floor, his voice excitedly pointing out every red truck that passed. I remembered the time he fell asleep against the window after a long day fishing, his hair messy, his mouth slightly open, completely at peace because he knew I was there to get him home safe. I thought about his first baseball game, how he stood nervously at the plate, glancing back at me in the stands. I gave him a thumbs up, and his face lit up with a smile. That boy believed in me then. Believed that no matter what, his father's pride was certain. But now, here I was, with a letter on the seat beside me that told a different story. A story where my son believed silence was safer than truth, where he feared my eyes more than he trusted my heart. The contrast burned inside me. How did we get from the boy who once ran to me after every scraped knee to the young man who hid his wounds in shame? The headlights ahead blurred as I fought back the sting in my own eyes. The steering wheel felt heavier, my grip tighter, like holding onto it could somehow keep me from losing him completely. Every mile home, the words from that letter whispered louder, "I didn't want you to see me as a failure." And each time they repeated, they clashed with the memories of a boy who once thought I was his safe place. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I knew something had to change. This wasn't just about a truck anymore. This was about the kind of father I had been and the kind of father I still needed to be. That evening, I asked him to sit with me at the kitchen table. No television on, no distractions, just the two of us and the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I laid the folded letter down in the space between us, sliding it gently across the wood until it rested in front of him. He froze. His eyes flicked down to the paper, then back up to me, and for a moment, he didn't move. His hand twitched, like he wanted to grab it, hide it away, but he didn't. Instead, he sat back in his chair, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. "I found it," I said quietly. No anger, no raised voice, just steady truth. His face drained, and I saw the boy he used to be caught in a mistake, waiting for punishment. But this wasn't about punishment. It was about honesty. "I read every word," I continued, keeping my voice calm. "And now I need you to look me in the eye and tell me what's really going on." He swallowed hard, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. For a long moment, he said nothing, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. I could see the war inside him, the urge to retreat, the fear of judgment, the weight of everything he'd carried alone. Finally, his eyes met mine. They were glassy, red around the edges. "I didn't want you to know," he whispered. His voice cracked, and with it, the wall he'd built began to crumble. I leaned forward, hands clasped, holding steady. "Son, I'd rather face the truth with you than live in silence without you." The words hung in the air, and I could see them land. His lip trembled, his shoulders sagged, and the toughness he'd been clinging to fell away. For the first time in a long time, he looked not like a grown man trying to hide his flaws, but like my son scared, hurting, and needing me. He kept his eyes fixed on the letter, as if reading it again would somehow change what it said. His lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Finally, he swallowed hard and forced the words through. "I messed up, Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Worse than I ever told you." His hands were clenched tight in his lap, knuckles white, and when he finally looked at me, his eyes were red and swollen. The wall he built was crumbling in real time. "I borrowed money, more than I could ever pay back," he said, his words breaking apart between shallow breaths. "I thought I was being smart, thought I could turn it around, but I didn't, and now I'm stuck." A tear slid down his cheek, and he wiped at it quickly, like he was ashamed to let me see him cry. But the dam had already broken. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I was useless. Or worse, that I was a failure. His voice cracked on that word. I kept thinking, if I can just fix this before he finds out, maybe he'll still be proud of me. But the deeper I got, the harder it was to face you. He dropped his head into his hands, shoulders shaking. I hated myself every time I ignored your calls. I wanted to talk to you, Dad. I swear I did. But I couldn't stand the thought of you looking at me like I wasn't enough. Hearing him say it aloud cut deeper than reading the words ever had. His shame filled the room, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it, I could hear something else, honesty. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, my son was letting me see all of him. And though his voice was broken, the truth inside it was whole. I sat there, watching him crumble, and for a long moment I didn't say a word. Not because I was angry, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted my silence to carry weight different from his. I wanted it to hold space, not fear. Finally, I reached across the table, resting my hand on the letter. Son, I said, my voice steady. This piece of paper doesn't change how I see you. You're my son. That hasn't changed, and it never will. His eyes lifted, uncertain, searching mine for the disappointment he'd been so afraid of. I made sure he didn't find it. Yes, you make mistakes, I continued. You ran with the wrong crowd. You borrowed money you couldn't pay back. You stayed silent when you should have spoken. Those things are real, and they matter. But they don't erase you. They don't erase the years of good in you. And they don't erase my love for you. I paused, letting those words settle between us. Then I leaned in just a little closer. But love, son, doesn't mean looking the other way. Love doesn't mean letting you drown without learning to swim. Forgiveness is real, but so is responsibility. If you want me to stand with you, then you have to stand up too. His shoulders shook as he tried to hold himself together. I could see the relief in his eyes, mixed with fear of what came next. And that was the balance I wanted him to feel. The safety of knowing my love wasn't gone, and the weight of knowing that love came with expectations. I squeezed the letter gently. This truck was never just about wheels and metal. It was about trust. And trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but only if you choose to build it with me, not hide from me. He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something new in his face, not just regret, but the faintest spark of hope. For a long while, the only sound in that kitchen was his breathing uneven, shaky, the kind of breathing that comes when you finally let the weight fall off your shoulders. Then, slowly, he lifted his head, his eyes wet and swollen, and said the words I'd been waiting for. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. Not just for the money or the truck, but for shutting you out, for thinking you'd stop loving me if I told you the truth. Those words didn't erase what he had done, but they mattered. They mattered more than he realized. I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded in front of me. I didn't want to rush my response. Forgiveness is real, but it's not careless. After a pause, I nodded. I forgive you, son. I always will. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means we move forward, but this time, together. He nodded, tears slipping down again. Though this time, not from shame, but from relief. I could see it in his face, that small flicker of hope where there had only been fear. I love you, I said firmly. That doesn't vanish because of your mistakes. But love also means holding you accountable. If you want my help, you're going to have to face the consequences head on. No more silence, no more hiding. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his shirt, and for the first time in weeks, his eyes met mine without flinching. There was still fear there, but also something stronger resolve. And in that moment, I knew the letter, as painful as it was, had done something silence never could. It had opened a door. Before I continue, let me pause here and say this. If you're still here, type "Respect Fathers" in the comments, so I know you're part of this journey. And for those of you watching from Florida, Ohio, Georgia, or Illinois, would you forgive a son who treated you this way? I'd like to hear your thoughts. I let the quiet settle again, giving both of us a chance to breathe. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and spoke the words I knew he needed to hear. Words I wish I'd said sooner. Son, I began, my voice steady. Respect doesn't mean you never fall. It doesn't mean you never mess up. Respect is what you show when you own those mistakes, when you don't hide. When you stand up, look someone in the eye, and take responsibility for what you've done. He watched me closely, his expression caught somewhere between shame and relief. I never expected perfection out of you, I continued. Life will knock you down. You're going to make choices you wish you could take back. But what defines you as a man isn't whether you avoid mistakes. It's whether you face them, whether you learn from them. That's what earns respect, not just from me, but from anyone in this world. I paused, letting the weight of the lesson sink in. Then I turned my gaze toward the letter still lying between us. You thought hiding this would protect me. But son, hiding never protects it, only builds distance. And distance between a father and son is the one thing I won't allow to grow. His lip trembled, and he nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. For the first time that night, I saw him beginning to believe not just in my forgiveness, but in the possibility of redemption. And for those of you listening now, let me tell you the same thing I told him. Respect isn't about being flawless. It's about being honest enough to admit when you're not. Families break when silence grows louder than truth. They heal when we face each other with honesty, no matter how hard it feels. He sat there quietly, nodding, his shoulders no longer stiff the way they'd been when we first sat down. Something in him had shifted, and in me too. I looked down at that folded piece of paper again, the same letter that nearly stopped my heart when I first found it. Hours earlier, it had felt like a knife, a betrayal, proof that my son had been hiding from me. But sitting there now, with his apology fresh in my ears and honesty between us for the first time in weeks, I realized something I hadn't before. That letter was a gift. It wasn't written in the best way. It wasn't perfect. It was born out of fear and shame. But it was also the very thing that opened the door. Without it, the silence might have stretched on for months, maybe years. Without it, I might never have known the depth of his struggle or the depth of his love for me, hidden under all that fear. Sometimes, the hardest truths don't come to us wrapped in neat packages. Sometimes, they arrive folded in a glove box, smudged with ink and written by a trembling hand. Painful, yes, but necessary. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. You know, son, I said softly, this letter, this was your way of finding me again. It hurt to read it, but it brought us back to the same table. And for that, I'll always be grateful. His eyes glistened, and for the first time that night, he let out a breath that wasn't shaky. It was steady, relieved. And here's what I want to say to those of you listening. Sometimes the very thing that breaks your heart is the thing that saves your family. Honesty, even when it's messy, even when it hurts, is always better than silence. Because silence builds walls. Truth, no matter how painful, opens doors. Family is precious. Comment below if you've ever seen parents disrespected in your community, or if you've witnessed silence tearing people apart. Your story matters. If you've stayed with me this far, then I want to step away from the table for a moment and talk directly to you, the fathers, the mothers, the sons and daughters listening right now. Because this story isn't just about me and my boy. It's about family and what silence does when we let it grow. Let me tell you something I've learned the hard way. Families don't fall apart because of mistakes. They fall apart because of distance. Not the kind you measure in miles, but the kind that builds when pride and fear push us apart. Think about it. How many fathers out there have buried their disappointment under stern looks and lectures, thinking that was the best way to raise their kids? How many sons and daughters have carried shame alone, believing their parents' love depended on perfection? And how many families have lived years, decades, even sitting in the same room, but separated by walls of unspoken truth? That's what almost happened to us. A father who thought his love was obvious, a son who thought his failures made him unworthy, and between us, silence growing louder every day. But here's the truth. Respect doesn't come from pretending. Love doesn't grow in silence. Families only stay strong when we're willing to face each other, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it hurts. So I'm speaking to the sons and daughters listening, don't carry your shame alone. Don't think your parents would rather have silence than the truth. You may be surprised to find out they'd rather sit with you in your brokenness than watch you suffer in the dark. And I'm speaking to the parents too. Don't let your children mistake your expectations for conditions on your love. Yes, teach them discipline. Yes, guide them firmly. But don't forget to remind them that your love doesn't waver when they stumble. Your love should be the ground they land on, not the cliff they're afraid to fall from. That's what this letter taught me. It reminded me that as fathers we can work ourselves half to death providing, teaching, correcting, and still fail to say the simplest, most necessary thing. I love you, even when you mess up. If you're listening now, I want you to carry that lesson with you. Don't wait for a letter in a glove box. Don't wait for silence to grow so loud that it drowns out your family. Speak. Reach out. Remind the people you love that they don't have to be perfect to be yours. Because one day, the truck in your driveway will rust, the house you built will fade, and the things you worked so hard for will pass on. But what will remain is how you loved, and whether the people you love knew it beyond a shadow of a doubt. So that's the story of a father, a son, and a letter in an old glove box. It wasn't easy to read. It wasn't easy to face. But it was necessary. And in the end, it brought us back to each other. Now, I want to leave you with this. Every family has its hard lessons. Some come through arguments, some through silence, and sometimes, like me, you stumble upon them folded up on a piece of paper when you least expect it. But what matters most is what we do when those lessons arrive. Do we let them divide us, or do we let them draw us closer? I chose the second, and I pray you will too. If you've ever walked through something like this, maybe as a parent, maybe as a child, I'd like to hear your story. Has your family ever taught you a hard lesson? Did silence ever stand in the way of love? Share it in the comments below. Your words might help another father, another mother, another son or daughter who's listening right now. And let me pause here to thank you for giving me your time today. These aren't easy stories to tell. They take pieces of you, and they lay them bare for the world to see. But if one person hears this and decides to pick up the phone, to break the silence, to tell their parent or their child, I love you even when you mess up, then it's worth it. Before we part, let me ask something simple of you. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone you think might need to hear it. It helps this message reach more families who are struggling with silence, distance, and the quiet weight of unspoken words. And let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing it. California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, Ohio, Georgia, or anywhere else in this country or beyond. Every state, every home carries stories like this. Stories of fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, trying to bridge the gap between mistakes and forgiveness. At the end of the day, that's what Father's Wise Advice is all about. Not pointing fingers, not casting blame, but offering stories that remind us of the value of respect, the importance of honesty, and the unshakable worth of family bonds. Thank you for being part of this one. And remember, respect isn't about perfection. It's about showing up with honesty, even when it's hard. Love your families fiercely, forgive quickly, and never let silence steal the chance to speak what matters most.